Cop Watch, policing the police every single day.
Say hi, Andy. I'm recording you. I got you.
Ocean City cops are not people.
Yes, they are. You know what's really criminal?
What's that?
Those knee-high socks.
I know, but that's what the brown shirts wore.
Good morning, Sheriff.
Good morning, Commissioners. How are you doing this morning?
Doing well, doing well.
As you guys know, for quite some time, I've been very active in the mental health and substance abuse problems that we've been having here in the county, and now we're kind of working on a statewide level. Back in 2016 is when I started my drug recovery initiative, partnering with Charlotte Behavioral, and then later Archway Institute joined in with us to help us with funding for that. In 2018, we started our mental health unit where, again, we partnered with Charlotte Behavioral, and we brought on a mental health professional onto the Sheriff's Office to work with our staff on the various mental health calls that we respond to and drug calls. The following year, we added a case manager to help us with some of the issues we were having with our elderly population and making sure that they're getting the care they need. And now I think we're at that point where we're looking at expanding it again. We're looking at bringing on some more mental health professionals to work closely with our staff and continue to respond for calls for service. They say that basically 1 in 10 law enforcement calls for services are related to mental health. So that's significant because we average close to 100,000 calls for service each and every year. So we're looking at roughly about 10,000 calls regard mental health and or substance abuse. I have reached out to, a couple months ago I reached out to Chief Fair because part of the expansion of that unit was to add a paramedic component to it, and it just so happened he was kind of looking at something on his end called a community paramedic, and I think the two will gel very well together, and they'll get into that in their presentation a little bit in just a little while. But today, drug overdoses and suicides have surpassed traffic crashes as the #1 and 2 cause of death for young adults ages 25 to 44. And in today's society, we don't necessarily view behavioral health crisis services as an essential community component, like we do law enforcement, fire, EMS, and emergency medical care. But today, we are realizing that the failure to respond properly to these crises, they create a dramatic in its personal, social, and economic costs. It often results in incarceration, devastation, homelessness, and even death. Many individuals are unable to access care in the community. The only option is to access the care through the most costly and inefficient points of entry into our healthcare system, which includes our emergency rooms, our acute crisis services, and then often our juvenile and criminal justice systems. We are looking to change that with continuing to be more proactive with this team. And we're asking for your support in this. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sergeant Craig Brandon to do our presentation.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. Good morning again, Craig.
Good morning, everybody.
Good to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here in front of you this morning. I thank you for your time. So I am Sergeant Craig Brandon with the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. Standing here with me is Chief Michael Davis from the Charlotte County Fire and EMS and Amy Hood from Charlotte Behavioral Health Care. Together, we have been working vigorously on this program called IRIS, and that's an integrated response for intervention and support. We have also learned and witnessed and seen on news coverage footage, national news, horrific scenes and incidents that has happened across the nation involving mental health. It is a crisis that obviously needs to be dealt with, and it's for the most part been left in the hands of law enforcement. And we've seen time and time again that law enforcement is not necessarily the best call for these situations. So we submit something better. This IRIS team will combine law enforcement with professionals in mental health as well as a paramedic professionals in the medical field that will be able to provide services to the community far beyond what law enforcement could do itself. In developing this program, we've reached out to many different entities in the community for support. The entities that you see here have not only bought into this idea, but they are invested in it. They have helped build it, and they want to be a part of it. Amy's going to tell you about Mrs. Jones.
So Mrs. Jones is your typical Charlotte County resident. Okay, she's a typical call for service. And in this example, she has called 911 and she's told them that she's fallen down. She's not injured, but she needs help because she can't get up. In our current response process, the response from dispatch is to send a fire engine out to assist Mrs. Jones. They come, they do a general look at her, see no major injuries. They pick her up, put her in a chair, they're done, they go back in rotation, waiting for the next call. A few days later, there's another 911 call. This time it's from Mrs. Jones' neighbor, and they're asking for someone to go over and check on her because they haven't heard from her in a few days. They're knocking on the door. She's not listening. So again, in our current response, what is going to happen is that dispatch is going to send a law enforcement officer to do a wellness check for Mrs. Jones. When they arrive at the scene, she doesn't answer the door. They look around at the windows. They can't see anything going on. They need access into the home. So now they're going to call fire and EMS and ask them to come out and assist with getting access to the home to be able to evaluate. Once they get inside, they find Mrs. Jones. She's unconscious on the floor. They're able to wake her, get her up, but she's a little confused, seems a bit disoriented, not sure what's going on, knows she fell, but she can't figure out why. Through that process, they identify that she's been prescribed some pain medications, and it looks like maybe she's taken more than what was prescribed to her. They're now going to send her via ambulance to the emergency room for medical clearance. While she's in the emergency room and talking to doctors, she mentions that she's got some self-harm thoughts lately. She now ends up Baker acted, and after she's medically cleared, she's transported to Charlotte Behavioral Health Care, where she's going to spend at least one night, overnight, being evaluated for any mental health treatment. What does this mean for Mrs. Jones? In our current system, the cost of these to Mrs. Jones alone is going to be approximately $750 for an ambulance transport, another $1,500 bill for the clearance at the emergency room. She doesn't have to worry about the transport by Ambutrans to Charlotte Behavioral because the county is already paying $10,000 a month to Ambutrans to be able to do that transport. But if she's uninsured, she's going to be charged an additional $700 to $800+ for one night at Charlotte Behavioral. All in all, this incident is going to cost Mrs. Jones approximately $3,000, and that's just the cost to Mrs. Jones. That's not the cost to the county or its taxpayers for the services that have been provided to her.
So as of last year, we're showing 1,309 lift assists. That's where fire engine with 2 to 3 personnel go out and they help people up off the floor, get them back into bed and things like that. 392 overdoses, 1,649 mental health related calls, and 166 well-being checks. Some calls that this team will be able to handle are those lift assists, drug overdoses, suicidal situations, well-being checks, lift assists, as well as chronic non-life-threatening medical complaints, amongst other things. So savings, the amount of savings that this program will bring to the county cannot be evaluated at this point, but many other similar programs around the state and country tout vast savings, primarily to the law enforcement and fire EMS systems. The program that we've created was based off a program called CAHOOTS in Eugene, Oregon. If you are familiar with that at all, their program has a mental health clinician and a paramedic. They cite saving roughly $8.5 million in public safety costs a year, $14 million in emergency room and ambulance services a year. The STAR program in Denver, Colorado, similar program, also based off of CAHOOTS, started their program. 6 months into their program, they ran approximately 750 calls, only had, they had no need to call law enforcement and took nobody to jail. And that's the benefit of having these types of programs in place. What you're looking at now is the cost for personnel, one personnel from the different entities involved in order to staff this team. We're proposing a pilot, 2 teams for the pilot program, and these are the associated costs per entity involved in this program, to include a mental health counselor supervisor. The goals of this program is that we will be able to better document the needs in Charlotte County. We'll be better to better address the services that we provide. We will reduce redundancies. We will save money for the taxpayers. And the foremost thing is providing the services that the citizens need. In that, we will also reduce the amount of calls that the law enforcement and fire services go to. We'll leave them available to be ready to respond to actual emergencies and actual calls that need their attention. So what you're looking at now is the sustainability budget for 5 teams, again involving the different entities involved, and it's roughly $1.4 million. The different funding sources that we looked into is a Department of Justice grant, $400,000, of course, Board of County Commissioners, ARF funds, as well as different grants and monies available to the different entities involved, to include those partners I spoke about previously. And Amy's going to finish with Mrs. Jones.
So now we're going to look, go ahead.
Thank you. I just have a quick point of information or point of order, but the presentation that's uploaded is not the one we're looking at. Is it possible we got uploaded an older version? Because it almost looks like it's a work in progress.
I was going to ask the same thing when they were done. So
I apologize for that. I had it put in here this morning. I thought that you would have it, but I have it here on a thumb drive for you all.
yeah, if we can get it to the clerk, we can ask them to upload it to so it's in our records for the future and the public can see it too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to look at Ms. Jones again, but we're going to look at Ms. Jones this time through the lens of Iris. So this time when Ms. Jones calls 911 for the first time and reports that she's falling uninjured and needs assistance getting out, the Iris team is then dispatched. So we now have the mental health clinician, a law enforcement officer, and a paramedic all at once responding to the first call for service. During this process, she's able to get a full evaluation and risk assessment, and we're able to identify not only that she has missed several appointments that were follow-ups regarding therapies that would have worked to prevent the fall, but we've also able to identify what medication she's taking and evaluate that she is mistaking her prescribed medications up front. We're able to talk to her about her self-harm thoughts and what the basis behind those are to determine if the Baker Act is actually necessary. Through the IRIS program, we're able to link Mrs. Jones so that she is getting outpatient mental health services and treatment. So she is followed back with her doctor about the appropriateness of the prescription medications and referred for additional services through home health that will be able to help her monitor those. She is also rescheduled for the missed medical appointments that will help remove the risk of the fall that is in there. Not only have we avoided additional major costs to Mrs. Jones, but we've avoided a second 911 call, we've avoided a possible overdose situation, and we've avoided a Baker Act.
So as I said before, some of the benefits of having this team is we will be able to leave law enforcement available to respond to law enforcement related matters. We'll be able to leave fire and EMS available to respond to fire and emergency services. But also, we will avoid some unnecessary arrests of people that are suffering mental health illness. That will help prevent the overcrowding at the jails, which in turn will help prevent the overcrowding at the courts. You've all heard the wheels of justice turn slow. Well, one of the reasons is because of the number of cases that they see. Ultimately, hopefully, we avoid any of those national news stories happening here in Charlotte County by having services in place to prevent it in the first place. Cost savings to all the different units, entities involved, all taxpayer-based services. The taxpayer ultimately will be saving money with this program in place. Here's a list of different agencies throughout the state of Florida that are involved and have a co-responder team. It's important to know that there is no simple plan for how a co-responder team works. Each jurisdiction creates their team for what best serves their purposes. And so the program that we have designed here is what we feel will be the best for Charlotte County. And at this time, we'll open the floor for any questions that you may have.
Very good. Thank you for the presentation. As we spoke this morning, very important subject for myself as well.
Yes, sir.
So I appreciate the time and effort that everybody's put in to bring this forward. It's interesting to me to see how many places around the country have been doing this for a much longer period of time, right? And so, I'm sorry, I keep doing that today, leaving my mic off. But I think that it's important that we do address this and that we do take this thing on head first and really attack the problem, because prevention is a lot less expensive.
Yes, sir.
So, Commissioner DeSeo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In your presentation, you had a slide that had the budget at $1,400,000. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
In the attachment 2, there's a summary page, and it shows a breakdown of the budget to be $1,981,277. Can you explain the difference?
So what you're looking at is the plans as it evolved. Since as we got further and we tightened up everything and went back and looked at numbers and things like that, the presentation that I have here, I apologize, it's not showing to you, is the one that's more accurate.
Well, the one you just showed here, is this the one on your thumb drive, the updated one?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this one just showed $1,400,000 for the price.
That's correct.
And then you have a separate attachment. There's multiple attachments. One is a summary from the Sheriff's Office. It's on Charlotte County Sheriff's Office letterhead, and it breaks down the budget, and it's Section 4, Roman numeral 4, project cost projections, and that shows $792,513 for the pilot program, and then the total program would be $1,981,000. So I'm trying to find out what's the actual cost here.
Yes, sir. I'll have to look at the documents that you're looking at to be able to explain that to you.
Yeah, they're loaded up on the program.
This is the letter from the sheriff.
Yeah.
It came out a couple weeks ago, so it was probably...
Well, I'm just trying to confirm, is the letter no longer valid?
Are you referring to this slide?
Yeah, you have this total cost, A through D, as $1,411,000. On the sheriff's letter, he has A through D, $1,981,000. So I'm trying to confirm, is the letter that we have from the sheriff void, and this is the actual cost? There's a difference here of $500,000.
Okay. So obviously, I'll have to look at that to see what the difference is, because I don't have that other form in front of me.
It's on the presentation. Yeah.
That's for 2 teams. I believe that, if memory serves me right, we had some costs with the fire and EMS that we hadn't taken into consideration. I'm not sure. I have to look further into that.
Yes, Commissioners. When I originally put this summary together for you guys, these are the costs that were provided to me, and I know there were some cost adjustments that they had told me about. I think that some of the equipment that we originally put in, we were able to take some of it out, but I'm going to have to get you those fixed costs because I'm a little confused here myself. But basically what we're kind of asking for is, of course, we need financial support from you. And with the relief funding, we know the relief funding has been expanded to be used for mental health and substance abuse. And if I'm correct, I think the county was awarded like $34 million. So what we're asking is if you would look at using that money to help sustain this program for 4 years, and that'll give us time to tweak the program and then also find out how we're going to sustain this program long term, whether we're going to put it into our budgets or whether we're able to find some other funding sources that'll help sustain it. Another thing you might want to take into consideration, and it's probably not a popular one, but I've learned that other jurisdictions have basically built in a mental health and substance abuse millage rate into their budgets. So there is a sustaining funding source each and every year to address the mental health and substance abuse problems that each entity has. You know, I've always said this, I've said this many times, that we are the third largest state of the union, but we're often ranked on the bottom. I think right now we're ranked 48th or 47th in funding for mental health and substance abuse, and that's basically on the front end. The most important is going to be your community-based services, and that's where we rank toward the bottom. And this is what we want to change. You know, SAMHSA also stated that there's about 56% of the adults who need mental health care and 60% of juveniles who suffer from serious behavioral issues are not getting the care they need. And we want to change that. But again, we need your support, but we will iron out these numbers to get you solid numbers. But I do want you to take into consideration those funding sources.
I mean, for me, I thank you for that answer. There's two pathways here. You know, one's the mental health aspect, and obviously the budget. You know, when we look at these things, we have to make sure we're dealing with numbers that we can understand and get our arms around, that don't morph and change. Because, you know, make a decision based on a representation and then it's 25%, you know, $500,000 more. Doesn't look good for anybody. Obviously, the mental health aspect, your argument has merit. You know, there's no doubt about it. Intervention in those things can show a savings over time for, you know, incarceration and leading to worse things by getting that early intervention. So, you know, I believe in that, and there has to be measurable results, though. Yes. It's got to be tied to measurable results, like some of these other agencies that have had, you know, anytime there's an ask for taxpayer dollars, and if the one of the arguments used is, well, you're going to see a net savings because we're not going to have all these other expenses because we're doing this. That has to be part of the process where it comes back and it says, here are the measurable results. You know, we've shown a decrease here, we save money there, and so on and so forth because of this intervention, and that's an important part. In terms of fund, go ahead.
You're absolutely right, and we plan on doing that. We've actually pulled some reports that other agencies are using to analyze their programs. So we're gonna look to see what works for us. You know, with the mental health unit we already have going right now, we've already seen a decrease with our Baker Acts here in the county. So I believe it's positive there. And our numbers have, as you've seen with the budget, our numbers in the jail have gone down, where I've actually reduced our staffing in the budget by 10 positions because our population is down in the jail. So I do believe us being more proactive is working. The unfortunate thing, and Commissioner Truex, I think you understand it, when I started the APAD program, I was able to give hard numbers, pretty hard numbers for law enforcement of what our costs were with regards to arrests, but I couldn't get them on the court side. You know, the state attorney, the public defender, and court administrator, they don't keep track of how much money does it take to prosecute a misdemeanor, to prosecute a felony, and all that. They don't keep those numbers, so that was very hard for me to do. But I think on the fire, EMS, Charlotte behavioral, and law enforcement side, we're going to be able to track our savings. But of course, it's going to cost money up front.
I know you mentioned some possible pots of money to help fund this. Did you look internally? I know every year you give back money to the Board of County Commissioners that's unused. I think that's slated for capital police budget. What if we just change that and use that money to go towards the program?
Well, I mean, that's something to look at too, but I also know that there are a lot of facilities in my future, and with costs right now, they fluctuate a lot, and I know that the county's been relying a lot on that funding, but it's something we can look at.
Yeah, I'd like to look at it and see where we are with that funding. I know the sales tax has generated some huge buildings and facilities for the Sheriff's Department. I believe we have your headquarters
Yes.
Underway. We just finished the unit off of Loveland that took a tour of that facility. Really nice, state-of-the-art, modern facilities. Hopefully they'll lower costs in terms of energy efficiency and fixed costs of operation for those types of things. Hopefully we'll realize some savings. But when I look at what the sheriff gives back every year, I believe it's a few $1 million. But I think by our policy earmarks that for capital. But that's something that we can change.
Yes, absolutely.
And make that part of the pot of money perhaps, along with the other things you suggested. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, great presentation. Good to see you all again. I think I share some of the similar comments from both of you, really. I see the need for the program, and I really am intrigued by this concept of an integrated response group as opposed to people going out independently and trying to evaluate and the layers of things that happen as a result of that. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And there's obviously the need. I think we've seen in the last year and a half all kinds of interesting things happening in our society, and I think, this is one way to approach it. But I agree, too, with Commissioner Teseo as for, obviously, we got to chew the numbers up. We got to understand what this thing's going to cost and what are the options, on funding it. And measuring success. And that's where I'm thinking that a phasing in, a stepping into this program makes sense to me. But I need stuff from Mr. Flores as to how we would do that. Resources, whether not just financial, but people. We're having a heck of a time right now filling slots in all departments. So manpower, resources is going to be one of the key questions I'm going to have. How do we do it? How do we stand up a program like this? So, but I'm in favor of pushing ahead and trying to figure that out and work the problem. But it looks like this is a viable process, at least, that we should investigate and try, at least try and get into it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Deutsch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We sit here and we're looking at spending $2 million, and that's a lot of money. And I think it's important we put things into perspective. We're talking about spending a lot of money. We may be ultimately talking about saving a lot of lives. And it's difficult to try and see, gee, how much are we going to spend per life to save it? I think that the funding possibility that you mentioned and the trial makes an awful lot of sense, particularly, Sheriff, don't want to ruin our relationship, but I'd like to compliment you on your efforts in the mental health field. And I particularly like the team effort of working interdepartmentally and combining across the board to try and anticipate and ultimately, in reality, saving lives in the long run. I think it makes sense. I think we've been heading in that direction. I think it's something that makes sense to try it. The funding avenue also seems to make sense, and it certainly will work on a trial basis as we try and keep track and see what effect. But all you folks, we thank you for your efforts, and I think the ability to work interdepartmentally and cooperate to this extent is going to provide a real service to the community. So I compliment you and thank you folks for what you've done, you and the chief and and chiefs and sergeant and the health, behavioral health. It's a great idea. So good luck, and I think you're sensing you have some support from us.
Well, thank you,
Thank you.
And to answer your question, there was just a math error. It is the 1.9, and that's for the 5 teams, correct? But I also want to thank Craig, Amy, and Mike. They took my vision and they ran with it, and this is why we're here today, and we're hoping to be able to take that next big step. I mean, either way, I plan on doing it. I'll figure it out, but I plan on doing it because it's a much-needed service here, much-needed service.
Thank you. I have a couple technical questions on, we're starting out with 2 team members, and that ramp up would start approximately when?
We're looking at starting in October for the 2 teams. Like I said, I plan on moving forward with it this October. October 4th is actually when I'm going to have my people in place. Charlotte Behavioral, they're bringing on a couple of counselors that they just hired. They got to go through some training. So by late October, we should have the teams out on the road. The first 2 teams with just a law enforcement and mental health. And then it's taken some time for, as you guys know, to get the paramedics in. So once we get the paramedics on board and we have the full team, they're going to go through what we have. We've established a mental health academy where they're all going to go through specific training together, which is advanced training. For some of them, it's going to be kind of redundant, but it's very important that these teams gel and train together so they all have that basic knowledge.
This is going to be an advanced CIT program, basically, right? You'll
Yes.
go a lot deeper into training.
Yes. And not only are they going to be responding to calls, but in between calls for service, we're identifying those who are high utilizers of our system, not just with the mental health, but also with regards to the emergency rooms and EMS, those who are dealing with the mental health issues like Mrs. Jones, who doesn't take care of herself. So they're going to be following up with these people to make sure that they are staying on course and less likely to use those emergency services, thus bringing down costs.
One of the things I noticed from the program in Eugene, Oregon, is they provide a lot more service, if you will. Let me find it real quick, the CAHOOTS program. They talked about dealing with conflict resolution, welfare checks, which would be the health visits, right? Well visits, death notices, public intoxication, non-emergency medical issues. So this is going to be a pretty broad net, right? So I don't think that we've even touched on everything that this program can do for the community yet. And I know as you dive into it and you're learning with other people around the country on it, that this is going to be a program that I'm 100% behind. I know it's going to be beneficial to the community, and it's just we got to figure out the initial funding and then the long-term funding, right? And so I know we're going to get a lot of requests on the ARF money, and so we've got to
be the first.
Yeah, and that's I think you are officially the first presentation on ARF money, but I know that I mean, you know how I feel. I'm 1,000% behind things that will benefit people in the behavioral health challenge world, and the long-term financing of this thing is going to be very important because I really believe it's going to be good. I think that, though, I'm slightly concerned with using what I see when I see that money that we've been using for capital. It's the stuff where jobs don't get filled. It's some of those things where you do find some savings along the way. I think we really have to budget for this item and not say, oh, we're just going to take what's left over to fund this program. Not a bad idea, but I think the way we set it up is, if we're looking at that way, in my mind, we're looking to inflate your budget to create income for the next year. And I just want it to be a line item in the budget and figure out the capital investments as they need to come up, right? So I'd rather do it that way, understanding that we can still have the conversation about that capital money, how we handle it. But not to handle that here today. It's just one of my thoughts and concerns. I want detail, and I want it to be accurate detail, and that's creating a slush fund in a way that I'm not comfortable with.
Well, and that's why I said a lot of communities now are going to that millage. I understand it's another tax, but it's a long-term sustainability for these programs.
Chris, Commissioner Constance, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed the presentation, Sheriff, and I think it's needed. But I do have just a bunch of little questions. So in one of your documents, I think when you're showing your budget, you have LEIRIS. Is that law enforcement?
Yes.
Okay, and then DFC is deputy first class? Yeah. I hate abbreviations, so. Especially when.
You don't like the DR for doctor?
Well, the thing is, but most people are tuned to that. I just want to make sure we have everything spelled out.
Deputy first class it's a ranking within our organization. It just shows that they're a senior deputy, because of course we're not going to take a rookie and throw them into it. Somebody who we know can communicate. They have they have the knowledge, the training, and they're able to step into this role without an issue.
They're all going to have CIT ahead of time, right?
Yes.
Head nods behind you. It's good. Okay, so we got the costs, and when I add up those numbers, it's just over 1.9. You referenced that you've got about 10% of your calls are mental health issues. Some of the data in the slideshow we had in front of us, I don't know if it was one of those
it doesn't add up to 10%.
Said 20%. So are we above the national average, below the national average?
Well, I can't, the problem is right now I can't give you accurate numbers. The national, a national study showed that 1 in 10 law enforcement calls are mental health, drug-related issues. When we went back and we pulled our data, we pulled what we can that was easy for us to identify, because we have certain signal codes that will identify something if it's mental health, if it's drug-related, if it's a suicide call. Those numbers are easy to pull. But then we have some other calls for service where there is an underlying issue of mental health and or substance abuse. It could be a domestic, it could be just a public assist. Those weren't as easily to identify. But what we're doing is we're working with our wreckage management system provider to see if we can do an update to the system where now when our deputies go out to a scene, whatever the call may be, they can kind of do a checkbox, and it's easy for us to query later. So they can check the box whether it's mental health related, substance abuse related, and I like to track our domestic too. So sometimes if it's domestic related but it falls under another signal code, they'll be able to do that, and then we can just do a general query and we can pull all of those. But right now I can only pull those that are specifically for that particular call for service.
And yeah, I mean, I agree. Retrospective studies are very difficult because you don't have access to the data you want. But a prospective, when you're putting all those things in place and you're looking at it real time every month, you're going to get a really accurate snapshot because now you know what you're looking for. And so that's great. And then looking at, obviously the costs and how we're going to budget it, that's one thing. But if I guess I'm trying to look at this because we should be saving. If we're not putting deputies out and we're not putting fire EMS out and ambulances out because we're diverting, then we should not have as much of a need for those services, not to contract them, but to just not grow them as much. So is there a way to kind of look at, hey, my budget shouldn't be growing as much, or my need for a budget shouldn't grow as much because I've got this arm that's more efficiently dealing with these people? So is that something we're going to look at?
No, you're right. And like I pointed out earlier, if you're looking at my budget that I submitted that you guys will be voting on tonight, is I reduced...
Next week.
Oh, it's next week? Okay. I reduced my staffing in the jail by 10 because my population is down, so I didn't need that staffing. The only part of that is basically the staffing somewhat got switched over to the law enforcement side because our community is growing so much, our calls for service are going up, so I needed more law enforcement deputies. So there is a savings, but I'm also, it's kind of moved over because of the growth.
Right, agreed. And I said it's not going to go down, but maybe there's a way to kind of, because we're converting it, you're shifting the costs and it's not growing as quickly, or you're able to, dampen that curve, that, that increase in your costs. I mean, I think it makes a whole lot of sense for people to be evaluating these folks on the front end and getting them the help they need without all the very expensive moves. I mean, I think it was very well presented how, you're just one thing leads to another with that example of our elderly, patron who, gets trapped in the safety, there's safety checks in the system. And unfortunately, you've got to go through all these safety checks, and the dollars add up really fast. But if people get to evaluate appropriately at the front end, and we can just divert them to where they need to be immediately, and involve the right professionals, I think that makes a huge difference. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner DeSette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason I brought up the sheriff's fund and the money we get back is I know you had a tenant relationship at certain facilities, and that's going to go away when you move into these new facilities. Is that correct?
Well, once all the new facilities are built, then yeah.
Yeah, you won't be paying rent.
Yeah.
There'll be a substantial amount of money that will be available once the renting relationship goes away, and I believe we're maybe a year away from that.
I think we're probably a little bit more than headquarters, and you still got training, District 4 and District 2, so we're still several years out.
But your budget may change in a year or two based on those tenant relationships going away and you moving into a new taxpayer-funded facility.
Yeah, overall, yes.
Yeah, so that's definitely going to be a plus. So I was just looking for I guess, a stopgap to get to that point, and I think everything's on the table. You mentioned grants and things like that. The millage, though, is not on the table for me. It's not happening. We don't raise the millage rate. It forces us to look for grants. We may have to reprioritize projects. We may have to defer something that we really wanted to get done, but we make those decisions to stay within the framework of what we're trying to accomplish without raising the millage rate. So I don't see why I would want to entertain that for this unless you did a thorough internal investigation on efficiencies where you can save $2 million somewhere. That's why I brought up the excess money, because that seems to be pretty consistent year in and year out for unfilled positions, monies that weren't spent. And I think it's a matter of policy. We just have to allow the flexibility to use that money, not just specifically for capital, but maybe for this, as an option on top of grants and the other things that you identified, because that's what we do, you know. So I appreciate the presentation. Like I said, hopefully, you know, this concept will move ahead. We can iron all these things out and move forward with it.
Yeah, I agree. I knew the millage thing wasn't going to be popular, but I was just bringing forward with what other jurisdictions are starting to do to maintain sustainability. As you saw, we have applied for grants. We haven't heard back yet, but $100,000 is going to be a drop in the bucket to what we need to get the program off and running. You know, we wanted to start it with the 2 teams so we can really fine-tune what we need to do, and ultimately we want 5 teams so we can have more coverage 7 days a week and as many hours as we can. So.
Yeah, we'll keep going after those grants because, you know, little here, little there. We do the same thing. You know, you get a little money here, little there, then you get buy-in from the board. You know, if we see that, you know, you're kicking in, we find some money. That's how it works. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate you all being here. Oh,
thank you, John.
Chief?
Thank you, sir. Jason Fair, Public Safety. So I just wanted to add to it in regard to, one, just recognizing the team that did the work, as the sheriff did as well. But also just wanted to carry on one more point with that. And we've talked about the dollars and everything here, and we know there's a cost for doing the service, and there's the cost savings also, and the numbers will work to detail out a little bit more. But I think what's important here, too, is just the impact that it's going to take from the service. For example, just taking that service load off. And while I think once we get the program up and running, we're also going to identify more opportunities to help continue to do that through other call types and everything. So certainly wanted to stress that in this. As we see an increased call, demand on our service, I think this is going to help tremendously to kind of stretch that out. So just want to identify that. And every partnership we've gone in with the sheriff, it's had great success. So we expect nothing different here. So just want to thank you for that time and just make those additions. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Appreciate all your work, your efforts. Vicki, thank you. Got a good team put together here, guys. Keep going. Thank you. All right, next we will go to our presentation on Charlotte County impact fees.